Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Center for Black Visual Culture. My name is Khalila Abdurazak, and I'm the program manager here at the center. On behalf of our director, Dr. Deborah Willis, and our program director, Dr. Joan Morgan, thank you for being here with us tonight for our panel discussion entitled Made You Look: Exploring Hip-Hop's Impact on Black Visual Culture. We're thrilled to be here with you all. Now, our program director, Dr. Joan Morgan, will introduce our distinguished guests and tell you more about tonight's event.
Thank you, Khalila. I just want to acknowledge our director, Dr. Deborah Willis, the visionary who makes this all possible. I feel like we need shirts that say we are all Deb Willis sometimes, because we are really products of her vision here at the center. So my name is Dr. Joan Morgan. I'm the program director for the Center for Black Visual Culture here at the Institute of African American Affairs here at NYU. I am overwhelmed at the amount of familiar faces in this audience. And I think when I was deciding who was going to be on this panel, you know, according to the math and the historians, we're 50 years into hip hop culture. Every single person on this stage has made a singular contribution, and they have made them in community. Like, there isn't anyone on this panel who doesn't know at least 3 other people on the panel for a very long time. And I think as we do all the celebrations, what we forget is that hip hop was never a singular movement, that we came up in this movement as children of the movement who became the writers, who became the artists, who became the musicians, who became the directors. And I think that you're going to notice a lot of that love and that connectivity on this panel today. So I'm going to try to be as brief as possible and give you the briefest possible versions of these incredible bios of these good folk. And I want to thank them in advance for being my friends and for answering my calls. And for making their way here. We are delighted to welcome Lisa Leone, Carlos Mare, Charles Stone III, Zulu Williams. I've known Zulu since he was 9. And our moderator, Rob Marriott. We Made You Look is a discussion and interrogation of the role hip-hop has played in influencing and shaping Black visual culture. This discussion will be followed by a Q&A, so if you have questions, write them down, keep them in your mind. We will give you a brief time to interact with our audience at the end. Lisa Leone. I owe a special thanks to Lisa Leone, because if it wasn't for Lisa Leone, you guys wouldn't be sitting at this program. What do I mean by that? I was a writer and a journalist, and I'm still a writer, and one of the first hip-hop journalists for 30 years. And so when Lisa came and said to me, I want you to be a program director for a writing program for an organization we're both part of and love, Young Arts, I was like, I don't know how to be a program director. And she said, yes, you do. So years later, I stand here because I figured out, oh shit, I know how to be a program director at the Center for Black Visual Culture, partly because of Lisa's friendship and tutelage. So I want to thank you for that. Lisa Leone began her career as a photographer documenting the early stages of hip hop. In her 2015 book, Here I Am, was published by Minor Matters, and it was accompanied with an exhibition at the Bronx Museum. Lisa's photos have been exhibited in both solo and group shows, domestically and internationally. Lisa segued into cinematography, shooting music videos for artists like TLC, Heavy D, and D'Angelo. She then went on to work with her mentor, Stanley Kubrick, on his last film, Eyes Wide Shut. Her debut film as writer, director, and cinematographer, Exactly, premiered at Tribeca, London, and Sundance Film Festivals. In 2019, Lisa won a Suncoast Regional Emmy for the documentary Remembering Surrounded Islands, commissioned by the Perez Art Museum. Can we give Lisa a hand? Carlos Mare, also known as Mare 139, is a Puerto Rican-American artist and scholar from New York City. His contributions span various fields, from pioneering modern graffiti sculpture in contemporary hip-hop academia to his foray into technology with digital graffiti. He is a curator and a co-founder of the Museum of Graffiti in Miami, has served as the U.S. State Department Cultural Ambassador, and in 2021, he launched the M139 Design Studio to expand his artistic practices. His recent achievements include his work being featured in Jay-Z's Book of Hove exhibition at the Brooklyn Museum, and he has lectured at the King Abdul Aziz Center for World Culture in Saudi Arabia. Can we have a hand? Charles Stone III. We go way back. Began his professional career as an animator and quickly expanded to directing music videos throughout the 90s, who created countless hip-hop classics. Yeah, no, seriously, y'all, I'm gonna run this list and y'all gonna be like, for real, for real? From Tribe Called Quest, I Left My Wallet in El Segundo, The Roots, You Got Me, What They Do, Distortion to Static. It's not on here, but Black Sheep.
Oh, the choice is yours.
Choice is yours.
How could you forget?
His first short film, True, went on to become the global commercial campaign sensation. I can't wait to do this. What's up? For Budweiser, and launched his directing career in film and television with his first feature film, the Spirit Award-nominated cult favorite, Paid in Full. To the crossover crowd, please a Drumline for 20th Century Fox, and the Sundance Film Festival premiered thriller, Lila and Eve, starring Viola Davis. A hand? Zulu Williams is a Harlem native who witnessed the genesis of hip-hop firsthand, and his love for the culture led him to found P&B Nation, an early influential New York streetwear brand on some real Bandulu shit, y'all, like right there in 20 Cooper after hours, on the silkscreen presses without permission. He and his partners used to express social commentary through design, graphics, and fashion. Being worn. Originally seen on New York City subway trains in the 80s and large-scale murals throughout the 90s and 2000s, Zulu's graffiti art under the moniker Serge One has been documented in books from the Platform 2, Tattooed Walls, and Graffiti New York. His work has been featured in motion pictures, New Jersey Drive, and Juice. I didn't know that. Is it Juice? You know, Juice was like filmed in my apartment on Edgecombe. Yeah, okay. I didn't know that. And last but certainly not least, Rob Marriott is award-winning author, editor, DJ, and filmmaker. We both started our careers at that sign there, The Village Voice, which is crazy. His career started at print publications where he developed a reputation as a thought leader at Complex Vibe, Rolling Stone, New York, The Source, and XXL, a brand he started with his partners in 1997. His investigative journalism work is expansive, and his work on the Death Row Records and the death of Tupac Shakur became the focus of the documentary Thug Immortal, a bestseller that pioneered the hip-hop documentary genre. His coffee table book, a photojournalistic novella, Hypnosis, became a top seller in the category. He is the founder of Content Studio, the XR Group, and currently writer-producer of a television series for Amazon with Cheo Coker. And now, without further ado, please welcome Rob and all of our distinguished guests. Yeah, Rob, like we couldn't really start and not let the folks know who y'all are. So.
Right, I thought we were gonna do it as well. So, should we start the presentation first? Is it on the clicker? Okay, yeah. All right, so I call this presentation Masters of Ceremony because my lens on hip hop is really, I think of it as a body of psychological technology. The the latest in the psychological technology that was built, in the Bronx and in Brooklyn and all over New York, to create a resurrection ritual that requires, initiation. And this body of psychological technology has liberation as its intent. That's the difference between hip hop and all the other kind of iterations, these corporate or money-oriented rap. Hip hop is really about liberation. And it's in the tradition of what Black people have done, all throughout this 400 years of oppression, which is storytell and live in story and create characters that convey information to negotiate that oppression. So a good place to start is Brer Rabbit, which was the character that was kind of built to give Black people the information you need to handle any kind of situation, how to make a way out of no way. He's a trickster. He's dealing with animals that are more vicious and bigger than him, but he always finds a way to overcome. And what he does is, with his wit and intelligence, he creates word magic, which is really the roots of hip hop. He's the original glitch, and he's the glitch in the scarcity matrix. They're always trying to keep him away from, living his best life. And he finds a way, even when the wolf eats him, he'll just say some magic words, hippity hoppity hippity hop. You ain't never hear Brer Rabbit die, and he'll jump out in pieces and run off. And it's not a coincidence in my mind that his conversation is how hip hop started. Rapper's Delight almost is verbatim that word spell. And so in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s, rappers just took that tradition and brought it to the modern world. So here you see the cover of Public Enemy, and they're in the briar patch. They're in that prison, and their characters are gonna find a way out of no way. So despite living in a hostile environment, it's still gonna take a nation of millions to hold them back. And what you see in their logo is kind of this rare richness. There's a B-boy standing in the crosshairs in that self-hug. And it becomes a hieroglyph because there's many layers of meaning. That self-hug, as you see Jam Master Jay in, is a part of a body of physical hieroglyphics that the B-boys use, that everyone from from the 70s to the 90s, everyone posed like this in front of the Apollo Theater or in the club or wherever it was. These postures, these postures of power, were conveying information and projecting self-love, intelligence, defying all stereotypes and the desolate environments that they're coming from. And so, hip hop was an insurgent movement that was built in code. And this image had that code in it. It was the crosshairs and the spotlight. If you were to interpret it in English, it's America's Most Wanted, right? And being wanted in both ways. It was the wanted, people wanted that figure to be killed, and it also was the center of focus. So when you see that posture in Tupac in this film Juice, there's a willful embrace of death. That's what the character kind of represents, because he's an escape artist like Brer Rabbit, and it's such a powerful pose that they had to take the gun out of his hand. You know, white America had to airbrush that gun because it scared them. Because it's no fun when the rabbit got the gun. And so you see the connection between a Tupac and a Brer Rabbit to the point where he wore the rabbit ears. And what's really powerful about hip hop is that, as I said, it's a psychological technique. So even when Pac wasn't thinking about it, he was Brer Rabbit. And he comes out of, he calls himself an outlaw. That's what Brer Rabbit was, an outlaw figure. And when you're really an MC and when you really are resonating on a mythic level, you tap into the imagery and the resonance that's timeless and that goes beyond just the moment you're in. So Tupac was that kind of MC. He becomes the man in the crosshairs. In his last album, he's on the cross, and he has the rabbit ears, and he becomes the resurrection figure. And here we are, Easter, where rabbits and Christ, find a meeting point. And when you're an artist on the level of Hype Williams, resurrection, it becomes a theme. And Jay-Z takes his turn as a resurrection figure. In this 99 Problems, he is killing off Jay-Z to become a new version of himself. And when that resonance is that thick, it repeats itself over and over again. So here's Kanye in a mask, here's Kendrick in the N95 video, and here's Lil Nas X, all playing on the resurrection theme. And it becomes prophetic. So Biggie wears the double Jesus piece and then becomes a double martyr when he and Tupac are killed 6 months apart. And because death is so close to us, especially during the 90s, 80s, you see death visit that ritual space that hip hop creates over and over and over again. So Kodak Black has that cross, in his face, and there's T-Pain with the Papa Gay look, and Flavor Flav and 911 is a joke is jumping out of caskets. In all Haitian ritual, or voodoo ritual, the God comes and takes over your body. And this is the psychological techniques that hip hop has created. And Gay Day was there from the beginning. So here is a still from Blondie's Rapture, one of the first videos ever, and Gay Day was there, and the Haitian women are dancing behind Deborah Harry. I wonder if she knew exactly what was going on at the time. But Kodak, being Haitian, he makes it explicit. And the other Haitian hip-hop artist, Jean-Michel Basquiat, also runs in the theme of the willful embrace of death. This one, his painting called Riding Death. And, another resurrection figure, ODB, also comes out of the tomb and the womb, and his operatic battle with shame is another theme that hip-hop really does. So instead of a welfare card being something that you hide, he made it his album cover. And because of that, the resonance strikes hard, and this mural still is untouched. No one will ever touch this because he's that important to the community. And that idea of, rising from obscurity, rising out of the dust is one of the prime motivators of of graffiti. So you have K. Slay writing his name on the train, and this is Case 2, one of my favorite figures in all of hip hop, who starred in Star Wars, and he said one of the greatest lines ever. He said he had come out of prison and suddenly he saw everyone doing graffiti. He said, "Man, niggas is writing their name big," and that he's in on that prime motivator for graffiti artists and writers. And here you see on the right these zombie buildings in LA that they it's political corruption and real estate greed that made it so that these buildings would never be finished. So the LA graffiti community made it a canvas. That's what you call placing your presence on their presence. And so we come back to Basquiat and word magic. And one of the things that makes hip hop, ritual and magic is that you do what you say while you're saying it. So when, Nas says, my intellect prevails from a hanging cross with nails, I reinforce the frail with lyrics that's real. He's doing what he says as he's saying it. And with Basquiat, he was impressing value into his paintings by writing, money and notary and commodities and Bank of Jamaica and, for all bills, for all debts, public and private. He created value into the paintings, and now, his family owns millions of dollars worth of art that he created through those triggers. And so bringing writing into the real world, into the 3 dimensions, this is something that Ramel Z did with his mask and his armor, making letters real. It's another form of physical hieroglyphics. And when you do that, you bring everyone into that ritual space. You become a master of ceremony. And that's the insurgency that hip hop really does, is it takes you out of the workaday world and into the sacred space. And when you're in that sacred space, you're not dressing to go to work or to get a job. You're dressing to create value in that ritual space, in that ceremony. So you dress for your soul, not for any other person. And that's a resonance that comes from ancient sources. So when you see Slick Rick, you see the Santahini in Ghana. When you see that gold and that image of abundance, you see what Barry Michael Cooper said is talismans against poverty. You create the magic that's going to change your situation. And that creates alchemy, because that crown on Biggie's head cost $6. But now that it's on Biggie's head with that slight tilt, it was sold for $600,000 2 years ago. And because of Baron Claiborne's art and Biggie's soulful poetry, it changed the value of that crown. And it's interesting when, women take control of their own image, because power in Ice-T's album, her power comes from the male gaze and the massive gun and the scanty bikini. But when the woman takes over her image, her power comes from her ritual being. And this is the cover of Honey. So when women take control of their image, power changes meaning. And so, Sarah Bartman was paraded around Europe during the Victorian age, and she was treated as a circus freak. But that same body type is wielded as power in, in modern day. It's not, it's controversial, but it's she's not a circus freak anymore. And that subjugation that they tried to put on her becomes imitation. After Sarah Bartman was toured, the bustle came into fashion, trying to imitate what became a revolution, a sexual revolution in Europe. And this is what black women do. They become the blueprint. They become the image that everyone is trying to be. So Grace Jones was Lady Gaga before Lady Gaga. And in fact, she's the blueprint for all female pop stars. Anyone that is popular and famous owes a debt to her. And here we see Kim on the cover of Paper. This was the moment that ghetto girls entered fashion. And when you see Cardi B in Milan running things, it started here with Little Kim. And the reason Little Kim was so powerful is because she had ancient resonance in her. Again, these psychological techniques were, for the masters of ceremony. Here you have to ask, is she doing it for the male gaze, or is that the power that you see in this pose coming from within? The fact that there are many, many statues and figurines that take that same pose makes you realize that there's more going on than just Biggie liking the way she looks. And when things are resonant, it repeats itself. So in Belly, there's that same pose. There's the fertility goddess. There's the mother of all above the main character. And in a movie called Belly, what is Belly? Is it the womb or the tomb? And so it's so resonant that even today, every female MC takes that pose. And there's Glorilla, the newest MC, taking that same pose. And no one uses that power, that yoni power, to more efficiency than Beyonce, who's now like the governor general of black culture. She's the head of the army, because no one can say no to the charisma of black women. She's the head of the spear. And because black women are the most imitated, the fiction that is Khaleesi on Game of Thrones is the actuality in Rihanna. And to go back to the beginning of this, Rakim is an MC that laid down the law. Paid in Full became the reason and the being of hip hop. And he inspired people like Special Ed to make I Got It Made. And if you ever watch this video, these young boys are the most vibrant, most insurgent revolutionaries, but in their rain dance at the Brooklyn Library. And you look at the haircuts, you look at the physical graffiti of their postures, and these are people who are taking over. And if you listen to Special Ed's lyrics, he's talking about his dog having a solid gold bone and owning an island and being wealthy beyond his dreams. And he's 16, Brooklyn Caribbean kid. But Jay-Z would ultimately manifest that paid in full principle right at the same spot that I Got It Made was made. So he made that word actuality. He made the word flesh. And just, like the graffiti, like Basquiat, his words are imprinted on that wall, and he's placing his presence on their presence.
Okay. Hopefully this will be interesting. That was amazing. I'm not just saying that. That was like, thank you for all that, because I definitely learned some stuff, and I think there might even be some connections. And also the previous image. Did you design something in that? Didn't you? Not in that in front of that library. Oh, there it is. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I dropped through the connection. All right. Okay, from witness to participant to content creator. Yeah, that's I think been my journey when I think about hip hop and how I grew up, and then what I witnessed, and then how I participated. Going to parties, basement parties, roller skating rinks in the late '70s, hip hop parties. Tried to break dance, didn't get very far with that, but all the while doing other things that I'll get into now. Okay, Louise Davis and from Hampton, Virginia, and Charles Sumner Stone from Hartford, Connecticut. They met in New York City, I think in the late 40s, and had that maniac over there. It's me with the ridiculous Don King hair. Those are my two older sisters, Allegra and Krishna. Okay, so immediately I got into getting jacked up on all the wonderful sugary cereals. These are all, I think, staples of the hip-hop community early on. A lot of cats do talk about it. Snoop Dogg, everyone talks about their stuff. Now-laters, blow pops for sure. And then also just really start to absorb, the media that was on television. And these were some of the things that I really fell in love with. Ultraman, which was a Japanese, I guess in the kaiju genre of large hero fighting giant monsters and stuff. He was my first superhero. The trickster god, Bugs Bunny, AKA Brer Rabbit. So I thought that was really amazing when you brought that up. I had to giggle to myself because he really has had an influence, and he's been in a couple of my films in the background, kind of doing his own little thing, and so on. So just a myriad of lots of animation, tons that aren't up here that were influences. Then I moved into the movie world in terms of enjoying a lot of the stop motion animation, which is essentially before CGI, right? Clay figures or maquettes and stuff that animated. The animator, Ray Harryhausen, did all these Sinbad movies and Jason and the Argonauts. Obviously Star Wars, well not obviously, but Star Wars for me was the movie that just blew my lid open. Like that it at that point I knew I wanted to be in the film world. At the time I was like, I want to be a special effects executive supervisor. Just because of what it said, because I used to read the special effects magazines, and it was like, that's what I want to do, and I want to work for Industrial Light and Magic and all that. But in the meantime, high school comes around, really get absorbed into arcade games and all that. Robotron was my game, for sure. Yeah, word, there you go. Then comics. Now the thing about comics for me is that I read the images. Rarely did I read the text. And that would be the sort of a double-edged sword, both bad and good. So then and then as I got older, like in college, I started to read more, but I went from comic books to abstract expressionism. So going from, Neil Adams to Willem de Kooning, then Romare Bearden and his collages and his prints, as well as Franz Klein, Mark Rothko. These things I was absorbing as a child. My father had artwork all over the house, and she would drag me to the museum. I always had a hard time with the Renaissance and Baroque period stuff, but on the other side of the Philadelphia Art Museum was the contemporary art stuff. So it was all this, which I was really moved by. Umberto Giacometti, his portraits, incredible. Barclay Hendricks, his portraits, incredible. Again, more Romare Bearden. I felt like Romare Bearden was one of the first artists for me where me as an artist, it really etched in a spiritual character of who we are. And of all that I've absorbed at that point as a child, gospel music, jazz, my father was a big swing jazz person, my mother was bebop, free jazz, and so on. And then just the abstract stuff we had, including African figurines and things like that. So he really embodied that for me. And then Grace Jones, interestingly enough, because he had mentioned it as well, Grace Jones for me was also one of the first, I guess, icons of color in a modern world that was totally science fiction and futuristic and all the other adjectives I'm not coming up with. And what's fascinating is that the person that she worked with, Jean-Paul Goude, who was a designer from France, really talented, but also had a real hardcore fetish issue with black women, the black figure, which is super dark, no puns intended. And, that I don't want to get into, but again, I took to various things that he did do that really I felt like was moving. I then started getting into international animation shorts from Poland, and this one, the Yellow Submarine, and this one's actually Vincent. It's an American one, but and then there's a Brothers Quay over there. So all that to say is that just lots of texture, not just Bugs Bunny, or not just Japanese animation, or not even just Walt Disney, but more different points of view, different styles, and that has started to inform the animation I would do in my music videos. These are stills from Fushnikin's True Fushnik, and the technique is called xerography, where literally I would photograph them performing, and then I would print every frame on Xerox, and then I would cut them out, and then I would animate them as they would rhyme. So that's when I started to sort of, I guess, bend the traditions or the canons that music videos had established, which we'll get to sort of a Brer Rabbit kind of, or a glitch, I guess, as you could say. I love the terms that you were using. Same thing here with Black Sheep, The Choice Is Yours, where the image implodes and, reveals the protagonist, yanking the image, destroying the image. Do you want this or do that? Or do you want that? So, again, the xerography was being used here. Graffiti was a big influence for me. I just enjoyed it in general. Growing up in Philadelphia, there are definitely graffiti artists all over Philly. So, and that inspired some animation that I did using graffiti artists, a couple of very famous graffiti artists. In fact, this one was designed by this man right here. This was his buddy Wes over there, and this is Brew. This is a video for Artifacts, the wrong side of the track. Another icon for me, like Grace Jones, Mars Blackman to me was like one of the first characters I saw where I was essentially seeing myself on the screen. I was seeing a whimsical, absurdist character, and I say absurdist in a great way, absurdity and fun, that I thought, like that first shot of him riding this bicycle towards the camera and screaming and stuff, I was in college at the time, in art school, and it was an incredible moment. So he, in many ways, this character also, I guess, concretized or just said, yes, you should go out and put your craziness out into the world. Bonita Applebum, I did that, 911 as a joke. Also having fun with type, which I always like to do, and the language, yelp is something I remember we used to say in Philly, coupled with John and a couple other joints. I left my wallet in El Segundo, this sort of sequential storytelling, applying images to every line of lyric, which is how I reacted to it. I put this up here because this is from Sid and Nancy, the movie, and there's this incredible shot where Sid and Nancy are making out, and it's in slow motion, and trash is just falling from the sky. And that's always stuck with me, so I wanted to replicate that respectfully in Bonita Applebum, where instead of kissing, they're slow dragging. That's the term. I was born in '66, so I went to basement parties in the '70s, and it was all about slow dragging. So they're slow dragging, and records are just falling, above them, behind them. And I repeated this in the video, where you see this couple slow dragging in different, areas of town because, love exists everywhere. And that was sort of the subliminal visual I wanted to put there. Okay, Roy DeCarava, African-American cinematographer, he should have been, but still photographer, loved his sense of composition. I remember his parents showing me his work and just being moved by that. And I eventually would apply it as well to some of the composition making I would do in my music videos, as well as in drumline. I guess you could say that's hip hop adjacent. Here we go. And back when I was doing that, part of the aesthetic for that movie, besides the thing of me saying, look, I want to make a large, muscular sports movie. Like that was the intent of the movie, like literally, because the training and stuff that they do, it's as rigorous as any other sport in its own right. But the other thing was geometry, that there's a visual geometry to marching. But then and throughout the movie, if you look, I'm finding geometry everywhere in the library and the way I do shots and stuff that I wanted to go through with that. And one last thing about drumline is the music. Oh, yes, did I say that? Okay, time's up, so let me then move on. All right, real quick, Maureen DeCarava, seeing the moodiness and distortion into static. Here's Brer Rabbit again, or Bugs Bunny. He's one of the first characters to break the fourth wall for me and actually wink at us as the audience. Yeah. And I did that in What They Do video, where I'm making fun of all the different music video tropes, winking at that his Lionel Martin look, keeping it real. Same thing here. Here's a traditional formation of a band. There's that whimsy, and then more surreal, metaphorical stuff here and the roots of walking through their neighborhood where everyone is dead. It's a longer story as to what's behind this, which I don't have time to tell, but nonetheless, just these are things that inform me. Lastly, myself growing up doing roller skating and stuff like that, and then the great work of the great Jamel Shabazz inspired my visuals for Paid in Full. Talk about keeping it real in terms of him as a documentarian. And then last but not least is the dialogue, the quiet language we have, the things we can say without saying, even though they're just saying what's up. The true profundity for me of this is these men holding hands through the phone. That's all it is. It's not even really asking what they're talking about. It's about holding hands through the phone. And lastly is, I'm sorry, I said lastly a couple times. This is the last thing for sure. And this is The Underdogs, again, hip hop adjacent. But I was honored to be able to explore the Long Beach world of football, which is very much connected to hip hop. Okay.
Thank you. What a brilliant body of work, man, and really took me down memory lane. Charles and I, we met, when PNB first started, and we were in the same office and bouncing ideas off each other. So that's amazing. This whole thing is like memory lane. I went to school right across the street. Roy DeCarava is one of my favorite photographers. He's an alum of Cooper Union as well. Yeah, so beautiful work. I just wanted to talk about the graphic language of PNB Nation for a minute. For those of you who don't know, PNB Nation was a early New York streetwear brand. It was created by Brew, Bluster, myself, Wes, Shara, and Sung. And we were just, like a bunch of young friends that were like-minded, similar interests in popular culture, music, politics, and art. And we went from like hanging out together and some of us going to school together to starting a business and basically building a brand. And it was like 89, 90, it was like a wide open white space. I don't even think streetwear was a term that even existed at the time. and we just saw that, or felt that there was a lacking of authenticity. There was a lacking of just a deeper dive in the nuances of the culture and political consciousness as well. So I can't really talk about PMB without talking about FC. So within PMB, Wes, myself, Brew, and Bluster were members of FC, which stands for First Class and Fame City. It's a Bronx graffiti crew, and dominant on the #1 train predominantly in the mid '80s, and then post or after the graffiti era, I mean the subway era, and when it was like the mural era. PMB remained very consistent and prolific throughout the 90s and the 2000s. So what I'm going to walk you through is really like just the early stages of what inspired the work of both of those entities, and yeah, just the early work. So I'll start. So first I'll start with FC. So FC was founded in '82, and Wes was given the presidency when he was like 14 years old. And one of the things that he wanted to do to keep the crew tight was these sort of we were card-carrying members, so that people couldn't, say that they were down with FC if they weren't. And there were like lists of the membership and stuff, like to keep it organized. And I think Wes probably got the idea of the card of the membership cards from a person in the audience who was Crazy Legs, because I know that was something that Rocksteady did. So one of the first logos we did was the logo that you see in the center. And Brew and Blus met at a lunch. They met in art and design. They went to art and design high school. And at a lunchroom cafeteria table, they first started really talking about PMB. And I think it started with a found image, which was a right side up pig facing the left. And they were interns at a silkscreen company, so they had printed some T-shirts, and it might have had Post-No Bills on it, but it had this pig. And when Brew showed me the found image, and the thing about the found image, I equate the found image with sampling, like taking something, and it's just very hip-hop, taking something, and, some odd random thing, and out of context, and then we literally flipped it here, but flipping it to be something else, Run DMC, not bad meaning bad, but bad meaning good. So when Bruce showed me this image of this found image of the pig, I was like, oh, we should flip it upside down and draw a ground and put an X in his eye. And the pig, meaning like the pig would represent the man or the system, not necessarily the police. And we were very much, inspired by Emory Douglas and what he was doing, and his cartoons as the Minister of Culture for the Black Panther Party. And in his rendition, the pig represents U.S. imperialism. So we took that image and we put it on the back of the shirt that Chuck is wearing, but we also put it on stickers. And we would basically either slap those stickers up everywhere we went or hand out like 40 or 50 every day. So what happened was we would be in a random neighborhood and go into a random bodega, and we started to see the stickers up that other people had put up, or in a yellow taxi cab, or on the plexiglass or what have you. But it was this way of, we looked at it as solidarity, by putting different neighborhoods, whether it was the Lower East Side or Chinatown or Uptown or what have you. It was this idea of solidarity. The second logo we created shortly after that, I'm not saying that we got it, or we were thinking specifically of Coco 144 and Riff 170, but definitely we were the last generation on the trains, and those guys were like the first. I think we all have this lineage, all meaning graph artists have this lineage back to the first generation. So the three-pointed crown and the arrows were definitely something that between us and them and everybody in between kind of has that lineage. So the middle is like our first rendition of what this logo could be. We had a halo at first, and we had like this elliptical, like oval, but the letters were dancing, and then we landed on the three-pointed crown and the arrows. So this is 91. The Juice came out in 92. But it was just, I was given like, I was hired by the set designer to do all the graffiti in the movie. But it was just like an opportunity wherever I could, like to put up the crew and put up my name. So whenever I knew where they were, where the camera was going to be, I was just trying to get that in there. And I know Western Brew did Clockers a few years later, and they did the same thing, like the scene with Thomas Jefferson Byrd at night with Mekhi Phifer. It's like the One Love wall, and you see all these PNB and FC. So like the shirt that Charles is wearing. So one of the things that the graffiti writers would do is we would go into stationery stores and we would rack up or steal rolls of "Hello, my name is" stickers, and it would be like rows of them. Throw a couple in our jacket and walk out, and then we would go and tag on them, and it was just a quick way of getting up. And the tag means this is who I am. I was here. And so Brew had this concept of the three names, and we just wanted people to ask the question of like, who are these people and how are they connected? And Michael Stewart, he's 25 years old. He was choked to death on a subway platform by cops. Ironically, the papers say cardiac arrest. And then Eleanor Bumpers, botched eviction. She was killed with a shotgun. And Philip Pinnell, who was shot in the back with his hands up. So, we just wanted to, the three names could be 300 names, of course. The PNB NBA shirt. So, this was around the time of, I think LA was rebuilding from the riots. The NBA was probably, I think it was like 80% black, which was all-time high. And conversely, the white players in the league was at an all-time low. And yet the logo then and now had this silhouette of a Hall of Famer Jerry West, harken back to like a wider league and a older time, and we were inspired by that irony. So we just threw the Dr. J afro on the silhouette. And this is also around the time where Chris Jackson changed his name to Mahmoud Abdul Rauf, and a few years later refused to stand for the national anthem. And then they suspended him, and they came up with a compromise that he could pray during the national anthem. This wasn't really about, this was a graphic for a t-shirt, and it really wasn't about my name being on a shirt. It was just kind of like a love letter to the culture, like just missing the trains and the idea of you put your name up on a train and it travels throughout the city, and kind of looking at the t-shirts is the same thing, like traveling around the city and still seeing your name up in just a different medium. And this is also like, this time period is also like pre-internet. So to get that image of that schematic was literally like looking up in the yellow pages where the MTA, design department was, and then going there. And I remember the dude, I told him I was a student at Cooper Union. I shit you not, he was like, "Oh, I went to Cooper Union." And he was like, "What do you want?" And I was like, I'm looking for these schematics, and he had books and books, and so I was able to get the IRT. So yeah, these are just other ideas we had, like the dates where we would connect the dots, and again, pre-internet, so I would have to go to the library and look at hours of microfiche and choose dates that had a connection or relevancy to the day, and just murals and more solidarity ideas. Just inspired by early hip hop, and just a lot of like everything was like hand drawn. It was like we had computers, but we hardly used them. Like everything you see here, the logo, the crown, everything was all done by hand. And then FC walls. This was like a graffiti-a-thon in New Jersey in '94, and we came in to and saw it as a battle. This was another, example of like connecting the dots to the past, and just asking the question, what if COINTELPRO never ended, and highlighted in terms of the mission of COINTELPRO to promote strife between organizations and carrying out political assassinations. And then back to like Charles was saying about the comic books and the cartoons, like FC painted thematically as a unit, and it was all about concepts. So we all came together with references and just we wanted to be as one, painted as a unit. And then Japan was like a huge. Japan was huge for us. Like we first went there in '95, and then in 2001 we got to paint some walls, and in between we had mini trips. So that was it.
Thank you. I'm gonna go kind of quickly through mine because I feel like we want to have time for Q&A also, I think. So just going through the work of, I went to High School of Art and Design with this one and a bunch of others. And it was really a fortunate time in the 80s to be there because it was really like the High School of Graffiti and Breakdancing. Literally we would just stay in the lunchroom for 5 periods, trading black books, dancing. By then it was like graffiti writers were dancing, dancers were writing graffiti. Like, I'm walking around the corner and like a giant Puma Clyde is like comes in by. We're like, oh, Doze was like practicing, and if a shoe fell, it flew around. So it was such a vibrant, beautiful, playful time, and I majored in photography and also if you think about 1983, it was a major year for hip hop to become global, really, right? Because you had Style Wars, Wild Style, and Flashdance come out. So all of a sudden, and a lot of our friends were in those films, and they needed photographs, and I was also I was majoring in photography. So a lot of the early images came from the need of like, I'm going to Europe, I need pictures, or I need, So it was I felt very fortunate to be able to document. I didn't know that this is Debbie Mazar, so you're like, why is she in it? But Debbie was, at the Roxy, at the door. First time I met her, she had like, Pumas on with some melon fat laces, and she was with Kel First, his brother. And that's how we met. And so like Fable and Wiggles went to high school together, And this was one of those, we'd shoot a lot together because they needed images, they needed, to go. So we would just go have a great time and play. And I don't really like studio photography. I like to be in the street. I like texture. This is where I walk around New York now. I get like, the texture, they're like ruining the texture of the city. Guru, we were in Paris. Fab Five Freddy and I pitched to Vibe to do a story on hip hop, French hip hop. And he was also going to direct the video with MC Solar. So we kind of like dovetailed this, which was fun because then we got the whole French hip hop scene. This is Far Side. A lot of these photos people have seen. I'm actually going through a new set of archives, so there'll be new photos soon, which is really fun to see, a lot of memories. But also I was like, after when Joan first asked, and I was looking to do this, and I was looking at the images, especially of the women also, like when you come to see, let me skip now. So this was in Henry Chalfant's studio, and this is, again, one of those examples of, like, we need photos. So I remember going down we were like, let's go down to the subway. And I literally just like walked down with a light on a stand in the subway, plugged the light in. And I was like, totally, it was like, and then I couldn't go back any further because I'd be in the track. So it was like, what can we, and then in Henry Studio, same thing, but also using the texture of Henry Studio because there was such great things in there as well. The photo of legs, but also with the Futura painting and all the graffiti and in his house with Wiggles. So there was like, it was legs and company. It was like, and Carlos, that was with actually a shoot that we went out with Cal, with his brother. Again, let's just go shoot, just kind of fun. I loved shooting in the trains, in the tunnels, there's just, for me, there's like magic, I remember Doe's, we used to like lift up the grates and then go and climb down, and then you're in the middle of the two stops, and then you like walk to the stop, so you didn't have to pay. I was like, what am I doing? But I just loved being in the light, the dark, just, and then there was two workers, so it was just, and that was Mare when she first came to the studio. I'm just gonna go through. This was and there's legs in the background, out of focus. So, but this was in Rocksteady Park, a reunion, of course, Flash. For me, I love this photo so much because if you don't know, so this woman was actually Fable and Wiggles' manager and wasn't a very nice lady. So I was like, this moment has a lot more meaning for me. What's that? Oh, Fable! Hi! Fable said wasn't a manager, but I don't remember exactly, but she was in, anyway. Fable! Drina was DJing a lot at the time there. Is Drina here? She was coming too. It's Fab and Shaba and Fab in Paris. This is when we were at the thing. Rosie Perez and Joe Moore in the house. So Rosie was directing videos, Lucian in the background, people who remember Lucian from Paris, MC Light, Jada Pinkett directed that video. This one, I don't know, there's just something like, there's like a little glow of Jay in that, so I always like that. I went with Russell to Rikers to visit Slick Rick for Vibe. Okay, and I, again with textures, Easy E, Isaac Hayes, Biggie. This is backstage of the show. This is Baby Snoop, his first video. So, and this was part of that video. So he was up on VIP Records, and that was what was happening below. We saw that. That was on East Harlem on the rooftop. Again, just a moment. Like, I used to shoot a lot of music videos, but I just would stay there for hours because it was really about finding different moments and not just the typical moments. Like, even with that Snoop photo, he just saw that photograph again in 2012, and he said to me, I don't even know how you captured that, because every photo back then I was always posing and this. He said I was very shy, which he was. He was when I met him. He had a little accent. So it's like just the moments of trying to catch the essence and not kind of just the visual, the facade. And so behind me, there's like 100 people. You know, it was a music video, and people are this, and the record people. But it's just staying to kind of feel. And I talk to young photographers about this a lot. I'm like, you know, we only had like 3 rolls of film, so you had to be more decisive. But it's also don't just edit in the when you're, you know, afterwards. Feel what's happening where you are. There's like, I see them just because you can, right, with digital. So, you know, I don't know, that's just how I like to just kind of just observe and feel what was really happening. And like, this just a moment of waiting, but there's just, you know, those connections. I mean, now it's, you know, with the phone, and there's the style and the fashion is different. So that's kind of it. We can go through question and answer, but I know time's up and we have to move on. So I'm just going to go. Oh, that's your video. Charles's video. Favor! And then, okay, and then Nas, and Illmatic, Doze. So I'm going to get again, Fable Wiggles. And that's it.
Wow, I'm like back at school. This is incredible. And I think more importantly, with some of the folks that are here who have lived through it, who have contributed and supported. And again, the arc of this story is quite phenomenal when you think of its origin story, and that we should find ourselves here. And you and Dr. Willis heading this up for us is pretty profound, and it, you know, one of the things, and again, some of my peers, I'm so happy that Legs is here, Fable's here, Serge, and so many of you who have shared this journey with me. But it's not just a journey, right? It's been conversations, it's been creativity, it's been successes and failures that get us here. And in trying to think of this, I mean, there's so much that has happened, and so much that I've learn to process about what this culture is. And it's interesting because I said, how do you start this conversation, right? And at first I was like, I am hip hop before hip hop. Yep. Because there was, you know, again, the conversation around hip hop is very contentious, especially now. And one can debate what it is, what it means to us who are much older, you know, pushing 60 and plus, right? And the new generation has made it their own. But for me, I took that. This is a Lisa Leone. It's a Lisa Leone picture. But, and I think the reason that I put this here, because it, in terms of defining the kind of challenges that this culture was placed under, I've come to understand it very differently than many, and in that, this arose out of a crime against humanity. And these are war-torn experiences that which trauma still lives within many of us. And the reason I say that, and again, I'm a person who has deep affinity for the early modernists in Europe who went through war and who were young people who were at the apex of their creativity and innovation for their time. So there was this kind of very sympathetic experience there. But, you know, going back, and the reasons I'm kind of, some of these slides, I'm going to tell my story, but our story, our collective story in a response. Because before hip hop, there was graffiti, there was always dancing, and there was always music, and there was always jive talking, and there was always something from like many different areas of the city. This is me as a young kid, probably around 11 years old, painting a train, like 1977. You can see how small I am. Now, the thing to think about, again, one of the things to think about that's very unique in this culture about the graffiti artist always put his life at risk. And that is a very profound idea, to go out and put yourself at risk for what you love all the time. And you try walking through a train tunnel, but it's not only worrying about train tunnel, it's worrying about cops and work bums and also some of your enemies if you had them. And so here I am, Henry Chalfant took a picture of me and Min Won in Nulat's train yard. And again, part of what I was thinking about this and kind of, again, the sharing the story of this experience, one of the things that has to be kind of underscored about this, right, as we're talking, you know, in this, because we can't just frame it around the Black experience, right, because this is a collective experience of people, and you'll see that from the early stages, that there's a multiplicity of ethnicities and people that took place from the onset of this culture, right? And these are some of the members of Rocksteady crew who I was affiliated with. I was born on the Upper West Side, but also then my family my mom moved to the South Bronx, St. Anne's 139th Street. And it's very hard to talk about that experience because it was ground zero for everything that was absolutely wrong. And this is just about, Vietnam was still going on and all kinds of things were going on, but most of the ills really plagued that area so damn much. And so I would go from the West Side to the South Bronx between my parents and Douglas Projects up to 139th Street. And then, of course, run around Bronx River and all these other areas where hip-hop was just starting. It wasn't even called hip-hop. There was no term for it, right? And again, you could do some of the research as to the origins of that and again, pick and choose. Everybody has a kind of tale to tell about the origins. But that said, we knew culture, right? We were thriving under this culture. And then Henry Chalfant and Tony Silver made this film called Style Wars, which changed everything. All of a sudden, we got to see ourselves in a very different way. And that was really quite profound because all of a sudden, we started feeling like, wait, maybe we do have value. You know, maybe there's a real story here about us. But it took an outsider, right? It took two white men who are very academic and thoughtful and interested in this culture, which originally was going to be a B-boy movie. But then, he got convinced to tell this story that involved all of us. And so if you look, all these kids are all diverse backgrounds, right? And that's me as a kid. But what's interesting when I think about this, what people don't understand, even at this age, and this kind of conflict we had with other graffiti writers, and I say, yeah, we see those guys, we're gonna kill them. What they didn't catch, there was actually like a real war, right? And Legs could attest to this, and those that were there, that there was guns and knives and there was fights, and so it was a very hostile environment for such a young person. But the background was the graffiti, right? And I'm gonna rush through it, there's so much to catch on, but that said, Style Wars was such a catalyst and it has been a part of my life. And then one of the things that was really important that I brought to the hip hop culture, my brother and I, we put hip hop on the internet. And we were the first ones out the gate exploring this new technology. And we actually started a company called Mare Media, but also the website and a project called Voice of the Ghetto as an homage to one of our favorite graffiti writers, Stay High 149, rest in peace, because he had disappeared, and we were like, we don't want nobody to forget him, but that message in itself was the one we were carrying over and applying new media to it. And so we were at that time turning people on to technology and our friends teaching them about publishing, teaching them about interactive media. We were going to all the record labels and all this. They would shut doors on us. It was like, these kids can't afford, they can't afford computers. You know, they don't know anything about this. And we're like, no, this is the future. This is what's gonna happen. So I ended up developing this website, which was groundbreaking for its time, the Style Wars website. And its format was kind of celebrating us in a timeline fashion, so to speak. And it was really cool because there was nothing quite like it at the time. And it allowed us to tell our story. That's the one thing we were so passionate about, as to how do we take control of our narrative, right? But not just keep it to ourselves, but share this with everybody, lead by example, right? And so the wonderful thing that came out of this was that I won the Webby Award. And that was kind of a first for hip hop, right? And this is years after, you know, initially getting into technology. So there was kind of a redemption in that. And then early on in my career, like around 1984, I started making graffiti sculpture. Now, graffiti sculpture is really important and lesser known part of the culture. And in fact, one of the first graffiti sculptors was Ramelzi, and then phase 2. And then I came in 1984 and kept going. And so I was exploring graffiti sculpture and stealing metal from the New York City transit system and shaping it, because part of the idea of making this this sculpture in terms of its relief was also this, what was being alluded to on the trains, but also because I was around the b-boys and the breakers, and in fact we always, some of them who were writers, I still remember this, having these conversations with Wiggles and Fable all the time, and some of these other guys, because they also were writers and they understood both the physical language and the physical nature of graffiti and letters. I would, you know, go in and start freestyling sculptures in public spaces. Later in my career, did this award for G Unit for 50 Cent. And again, the vernacular, the language, but also trying to exemplify an elevation of both aesthetic and art and design. And then, more importantly, one of the things that was interesting, this graffiti eye sculpture, just to kind of give you some background on how that was the BET Award. I was designing a website for BET that was called Wrap It Up. It was a big campaign around HIV/AIDS awareness in the Black community. And so they saw that sculpture and they said, hey, you know, are you interested? We got this award coming up and we're not quite sure. Are you interested in this award? And I said, yeah, I know what it is. And they said, how could you know? We just told you. And I said, well, I understand the Black experience. I lived it in New York. I know the artistic experience. I live it every day. And so the award was designed with 3 key words. And I walked in with 1 design and 3 words, and it got made. And the platform of it was to signify where you aspire from, then the ascension, and then you know, the achievement, which is Black Star Power. And then, of course, that's my contribution. And what's phenomenal for me is that some of my heroes, like Stevie Wonder and others, have received this. But again, I use that award as a teaching, and that short little narrative as a way to teach people and young people about how to think critically and simply, and again, move forward. And so in closing some of this, you know, I said to myself, hip hop had no exclusivity. It has always been an amalgamation of nationalities and cultural cues inherited and cultivated over time. Its interdependency, which is a very important word, on its diversity is and always be its power for longevity and innovation. And I say that because in the celebration of Hip Hop 50, so many people have been left out. And so many countries, okay? And I think about my friends who left the US in the early 80s, and my friends who in Europe were like, yo, we've been rocking since 82. You know, we've been rocking, we have our origin story too. So the kind of unfortunate part of American culture and the cycle of hip hop, or whatever they're calling hip hop now, is that it's not totally embracing its tremendous success in that way. But we are seeing that. Last year, you know, throughout Europe, there's all these events and things that are going on, which are really important. And then, most importantly, what came out of this that was, I think, what drives me and motivates me was that my creativity was not about museums and galleries, even though as a young man, the reason a lot of my work turned towards modernism and a kind of language, right? I had to learn their language to articulate critically what we were doing to defend it. And so part of that was my time as a young man very early on, from the age of 12 on, spending time in museums and saying, where the hell are we in this? But I see relativity by proximity with Picasso and this other person, right? You start seeing these visual cues that make sense. And so for me, as I travel, the whole thing about exploring the culture was that it was my passport, it was my creative passport to the world. I did this because I wanted to get out of New York. I wanted to get out of the South Bronx. And so it allowed me to kind of travel the world. And this is more recently in Saudi Arabia, where I was talking about collaboration, right? And the unique thing about all of this is that in my journeys in hip hop, it's diversity. It's diversity of ideas, of ethnicities and cultures. It's including a whole array of things that have enriched my life far more than what I could have gained through gallery success. And so there it is.
So I want to really take a moment to acknowledge and show some appreciation for what you heard, because I knew this was gonna be the shit. But yo, seriously. We're running a lot behind. And so I'm gonna give the mic to Rob and ask you if you will conduct the Q&A so you guys can interact with the audience a bit.
All right, we should, I guess, go straight to the Q&A. Is there any questions?
Hi. So, you know, I have the unfortunate. Sorry. I have the unfortunate pleasure of being me. So, the self-love hug that came from the 5% Nation of Islam, and I know that because I used to be in the 5% Nation of Islam. The idea of this was right over left, so you could drop your 7 as a sign to let other 5%ers know if they were around that you were down as well. The other thing was, you know, it wasn't a b-boy stance. When people from the streets got a hold of that, that was a stick-up kids. That was all, you know, we were sizing you up, you know, posting up on you, ready to rob you. And just a shout out to Jean-Michel. He was also half Puerto Rican. Oh, man. Dez, a.k.a. K-Slay. I think it's really important that you shout out the brother's graffiti name if you're going to talk about his graffiti life. That's really important because that's how we got to start. Iris Chacon was a major influence on how women dressed as well. And Grace Jones's career was also started by Antonio Lopez, who was the one who put the color in her life. And that's how she started moving around. That's just a statement.
No problem.
Hi, my name is Jewel Champel. I'm a photographer and archivist. And I had a question for, I believe your name is Charles. Yes, so I was really, throughout your presentation and throughout everyone's presentation, I had a lot of takeaways, but Your reference to visual geometry, I love just drumline, and I wanted to learn more about your role, but more so, how do you feel as though visual geometry supported the film of Drumline? I graduated from an HBCU, so what I took away from Drumline is just the essence of just capturing HBCUs, but more so, how do you feel as though visual geometry supported the film, and then also documenting the culture of HBCUs within that as well? Like, how did that help to tell the story?
Well, I guess the visual geometry is you could probably, anyone can read what they want to read into it. For me, visually seeing the diagrams that were playing out, I knew that there would be, I wanted to expand on that and see it in other parts of that experience. I didn't go to historically black college, so it was my opportunity to actually live vicariously through that with love and hopefully respect. But also percussion, put it this way, when Drumline was first presented to me in the script, the main character, Devin, was going to a quote unquote mainstream university, which was predominantly white. And there was a fear I had immediately that it would be sort of a situation like, all right, the rhythm filled black kid is gonna come and school the rhythmless white people. So I was like, and I had no proof, but that's where it was headed, so I passed on the script. It came back, I don't know, maybe about 6 months or so later, and he was going to historically black college. And it wasn't just like, oh, okay, cool, because now it's gonna be an all black thing. It's a blanket way of saying that. But for me, it was an opportunity to explore things in a safe manner, which is percussion. So there was stepping and how that played as well as the marching itself. And then the geometry, you know, you'd mentioned about hieroglyphics and stuff, and especially, there's one of those Shabbats where all the kids they're posing and they're all doing something very different. There's such a balance to it. So that kind of contributes to it. But I guess that's kind of it. Again, one could probably go even deeper down that rabbit hole to see what else it supports, but yeah.
Thank you. The graduation scene, like even just seeing that, it was just so beautiful. It was just like every year.
Well, that was important because the overhead shot was to set up a marching band, right? Even though it's not, but also, and it was tricky to do, the one person, the one peg in that geometry is off.
Yeah.
And so once the camera booms down, then we come closer to realize who is the person who's off, and it's Devin who's like, I'm not trying to be a team player, in a sense. And that was to set that whole theme up of him learning to become a team player.
It was a great way of recognizing the main character non-verbally, I thought, just with that imagery. It was like just capturing it still, but it's still moving.
Cool.
That was great. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, just a quick statement and then a question. Yeah, when you mentioned Emory Douglas, I'm not affiliated with the publisher, just so you know, there's a book of his work that is a must purchase. You know, it was out of print for a while, just make sure you pick it up. He's a definitely unsung Black American artist hero and worked with the Black Panthers, as you mentioned. Two, I was in the back, so I couldn't see everyone when they were doing the introduction, but they said one of you worked with Stanley Kubrick. And I was curious, when you had the picture from Belly, I haven't watched Belly in years, but there was a picture with DMX with the mural with the woman behind him. And I was curious, it kind of made me think of Clockwork Orange, Crow of the Milk Bar, and the scene when Malcolm McDowell's character went back to his home with the painting of the woman. Was Hype Williams at all influenced by Kubrick's work when he shot that film?
I got something to say. So the DP of Belly is Malik Saeed. Malik Saeed is the master of the visuals of all of, Hype was amazing. His background is in art direction, so he definitely has that vision. But Malik and I we shot our first music video together. He shot like A camera, I shot B camera. So we traveled a lot together. Malik is a visual genius. So I'm sure that Malik had that kind of influence. And then later on, I hired Malik to shoot second unit for me for Stanley. So.
Hey, I'm so glad to be here and here to celebrate my OG hip hop fam, Dulce TC5. But I have something to say as also as an adjunct professor at NYU Tisch and a member of the Native Studies Forum Advisory Committee to the Provost. And we have a commitment as forum members to speak out when we see something in NYU campus that's of concern to our program and our Native students. And in this beautiful presentation of so much knowledge and gold, I thought his brother Rob Marriott show this picture of Left Eye in the headdress and describing that as a shining moment of power for Black women. You might not be aware of the protests and the controversy in that led Honey Magazine to issue an apology, and I worked with them directly to actually, for the follow-up issue, to issue an apology and to feature stories about Indigenous women. And so to see an image of such offense in a moment when NYU is opening an Indigenous Studies Center, we can do better. And I hope that people will just give that some thought. Thank you for everything else in your wonderful presentation.
Which leads me to my question. I work in media and in advertising, and often the idea of urban comes across, oh, well, we want to do something urban. We want to talk to the urban, And a lot of the visual language, whether it be the gold rope chain or the Adidas tracksuit or whatever that has become shorthand for the urban audience or the hip hop audience, has been co-opted by a very diverse group of art directors and creators. I'm interested because we do see representation on this particular panel of my generation, where there's no one on this panel who's a stylist creating images, new images now. I'm not saying you guys aren't creating, you understand what I'm saying, right? So I'm interested in how you feel, because Carlos, you talk a lot about diversity, but often that gets thrown up in some of the rooms that I'm in as, well, why do we have that? Oh, well, because hip hop belongs to everybody now. So I'm interested from the perspective of the people on the panel, how you think that the images that you helped to create and spearhead and birth into this lexicon, how they're being used now, and the responsibility that we have to keep things quote unquote pure or not, and not gatekeep. I'm just interested in your take on today's hip hop visual landscape.
I think it's important, again, age, we're up there, right? And young people, yeah. Well, when people often ask me about hip hop, like people like to romanticize it, right? We can only speak from our romantic space and all that. This generation is working under a whole different societal construct, a whole different economic system, a whole different technological system, a whole different psychological system, right? That's very self-empowered, self-absorbed, and so on, right? But also they become more visually literate, right? And in many ways through materialism, right? But they've also become, I think, very aware intellectually and emotionally, which is very different from my generation, right? Like now we've figured out how to, speak these words. They have are empowered with more access to education, right, and information that informs them. And more importantly, they're making art of their time with the tools of their time. And it's special, and it's different. And sometimes we all can kind of sit back and say, what the hell is this, and so on and so forth. But that's what they said about my generation, and like, you know what I'm saying? And so it's a slippery slope, so to speak. But because I travel around the world and see what this culture is and what maybe it isn't, from both sides. And it's still thriving. In fact, I'm going to Paris for the Olympics because of the B-boys, or the Olympics. Who would have thought of that, right? And so this generation is operating with all the abundance and all the legacy. Again, this is why I say about culture. It cultivates itself. Look, the work I do is not for me. It's the inheritance for the next person. Look, I inherited phase 2 and riff and stay high and all that. That's my inheritance, right? And so I play that forward, right? And they're doing the same thing with their generation, right? And it's actually quite different in the way that they're doing it because they have better tools. We had a subway system, which was our internet, right? And they have Instagram, yeah. And so trust me when I tell you this, when I go to Russia, when I go to Saudi, when I go to all these places, they love and value this deeply, way deeper than we do, to be honest. They study, and they have this deep affinity, and it's not about co-opting it, right? It's about respecting it, and again, creating their own origin story from it.
Hi, sorry everyone. That was such a beautiful. That was such a beautiful answer. I would love to echo what you said because I'm a Ghanaian British New Zealander. I teach here in music technology at NYU, and I'm also a composer, performer. And so I am I'm a musician of any kind, and the way that hip hop has affected my cultures in New Zealand and Ghana is just, especially for Indigenous people, yeah, I can't even go there. My question is really this. Listening to Rob's symbology and the connections at the beginning, and then just seeing all these, I think, so many beautiful connections, musical connections and visual connections, and I guess deep philosophical knowledge. My question is really, it seems like a kind of facile question, and I hope it's not a yes or no question, but really for the panel is, I am a composer, so I think of periods like Renaissance, Baroque, blah, 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 and I kind of hear people say hip-hop culture like, oh, it's like a culture, like there's another one. Like I love punk, so that's punk culture, hip-hop culture. But as I see 150 years of jazz, 50 years of hip-hop, and like maybe 40 years of techno, whatever, it seems like hip-hop isn't going to go anywhere. And my first question was really like, is there anything else that hasn't been affected by hip hop and music? And I'm really like a classical composer, all sorts of stuff that I do. All my students, I can't see what's not affected by hip hop. So I'm like, is this actually that? When we talk about hip hop culture as like our culture, if we look back, is this really our culture, or is there anything outside of this that's not the culture, like a Renaissance or Baroque?
Well, can I just stop you for a second?
No,
because because if you're defining hip hop as just music,
no, I'm not.
Right?
Definitely not.
And that's the whole thing, right? How it's defined these days. It's rap music or popular music, so to speak, right? And then you have people who may practice disciplines, and again, people who are younger than us, right, again, are using these tools to innovate, especially now with AI, right, and technology. So they are way more empowered. So we're not even going to see, like, I guess the impact of this probably for maybe another year or 2 years, so to speak, because it's going to reimagine itself. The culture is going to reimagine itself visually, creatively, economically, right? And so for me, as I think about what the future is, right? Yes, there is technology and all that stuff, but I think there's enough kind of like traditionalists out there in the world, so to speak, that are, and this is the beautiful thing about the culture, right? It regenerates. It starts from, it regenerates itself, but you cannot stop what technology is bringing to the table at the moment, right? And with that, it's a slew of problems and a slew of wonderful opportunities. But to be honest, if you think about what Timbaland did, remixing through AI, that was kind of a breakthrough moment, right? And so imagine what music is and can be. It's not going to be what, just like our parents said, why is Grandmaster Flash scratching? Isn't he destroying the record? Right? We're at that moment now with AI.
Thank you.
We have time for like 2 more questions.
Hi. So we all know that hip hop is not just music or not just one genre or medium. It's a global culture based on creativity. This is kind of an open-ended question, so it's not very specific, but I was curious, and this relates to something I think Mare was saying a few minutes ago, but I was curious about your thoughts on the evolution and impact of hip hop culture globally. At this state and this point in time, because it's something that I've done a bit of research about myself in different continents around the world, and I'm very curious about what some of your thoughts are on the state of hip hop and its impact globally. That's aesthetically, visually, but also it could be, in other artistic mediums as well.
When you ask that, it reminds me of the first day that I landed in Zambia, and whenever I go to a new place, I try to kind of circumambulate and get my bearings and just walk around. And the first child that I saw was probably 9 years old, and I was in Lusaka, as far away from New York or LA as really possible. And he had Tupac written in chalk on the side of his head. And it was like such a stunning moment for me, because I just realized like how far-reaching the culture was, and how deeply impactful it was. That this child is, we were like in tall grass, basically, had Tupac written in the side of his head. I think, because of the technology I talked about, the psychological technology, and the fact that, hip hop is a process in which you create yourself. It's the dominant culture in young people all over the world. It's become a vehicle in which you build yourself, on your own. It's not your parents. It's not your peers necessarily. It's how you find the voice. And you can see it, I've traveled all over Africa, for example, and there's always a herald patch of young people who, find hip hop, and at first they're trying to sound American, and then slowly but surely there's a trajectory of where they start to sample their own music, be it in South Africa or in Nigeria or Kenya, and then they start to sound like themselves. And I remember actually a friend of mine in Ghana was a producer, Panji, and he was like the first to really sample Fela, and Reggie Rockstone created this truly, African sound, and I see that trajectory, everywhere at different stages, so in South Africa it's probably like 2009 right now, in Kenya's 2000. Hip hop has become the way that young people find their voice.
Yeah, I would just to say something similar. I remember going to Japan in the mid '90s up into the 2000s, and that was the same experience that I saw. Kids, DJs. I mean, incredible DJs, kids break dancing, going to a club, you come out 3 hours later, they're still, break dancing and practicing. And also what you said about making it their own, like having conversations with graffiti writers in Japan. And at first they want to do New York, and it's like, don't do New York, do you, because that's going to be more important and more impactful. And then coming back and seeing them get their own style and sort of doing their own thing from their own lens. So yeah, just to reiterate that.
A final question? We can take one more before we close out.
Thank you, everyone. I loved all the presentations. I learned a lot. I grew up in the Bronx, born and raised, so just like my childhood, everything was being shown to me. So I have a lot of critique about gentrification in terms of like how much it erased, because for us, like for me, graffiti and hip hop was my culture, was my life. It saved me from the streets. And I know like why it's gone, but this is a question for anyone, like, do y'all have anything to share about the commodification of graffiti and it, like Basquiat comes to mind just because like there's so much capitalization off of his art. Like the people who collect his art don't even understand the politics of his art, like, because he was still so deeply political. So I'm glad that was talked about. And also, like, is any of the work that y'all have made over the years going to be in the Bronx Museum, the Hip Hop Museum in the Bronx? And I know somebody's missing, so.
I don't really have an answer, but to say that, yeah, that's a struggle. There's always going to be the commodification of or the commercialization of something that starts underground, that blooms, and then it becomes popular, and there's always just going to be that war. This is a very pessimistic answer. Just mean that there's just going to be this war, the yin and yang of that, of greed and exploitation, and then those who fight to correct it or to illuminate, to create the balance, the balance to the force. But yeah, that I feel like is what's bumming me out, is the power of greed is so tremendous in our politics and everything right now, and it's really quite scary. So, okay, I just went down a very depressing rabbit hole.
It's true, though. It's the truth.
I think it's always a war, and what we see in hip hop is that going back and forth. But I think in the DNA of hip hop is that self-corrective. As soon as it goes too far left, something pops up. I think about like when I first heard Wu-Tang, it was probably one of those moments where, corporate had just discovered hip hop and, they were trying to find like, these really clean versions or iterations of it to sell, and then like suddenly, Inspector Deck and Old Dirty Bastard show up. I think, it was interesting that Yassine Bey was talking about Drake in this podcast, and he said, the music is very, he calls them pop, and he said the music was compatible to shopping, shopping with edge. And for all of us that grew up with hip hop as an insurgency, when we were like rushing the mainstream and destroying, it's hard to understand what happens after post Puffy, like that, when it becomes available to everyone and all kinds of people are calling themselves hip hop, and you don't recognize that energy from when you grew up. The intent is changed. Drake is not trying to be political. He's trying to upturn every stream. So his approach is completely different, and it's hard for someone who, was bum rushing, the status quo to understand what that status quo is now. Like people that, with lyrical dexterity and bringing meaning doesn't have the same impact to a child that's growing up in a tsunami of data. they're looking for, sonic viscosity and a signal that's going to cut through the noise. So Sexy Red may have an appeal to a younger audience that, someone who grew up on Nas is not going to, feel the same. Or, Playboy Cardi, where, it's like, can you distinguish what someone is hearing, because the generation has a different set of needs. Like, he was saying, like, the technology that we have right now, the whole idea of AI, the whole idea of, going from, graffiti artists who, are trying to go all city and using the magic of repetition, could never get the scale of like 1 billion views, So it's an entirely different set of circumstances, and I try my best to not be like my jazz fathers who said, hip hop is like hamburger compared to the steak of jazz. You know what I mean? There are things that we have to, really stay open to in order to see where the next thing happens. And I apologize if the headdress offended, but I look at it in the context of like Soul Sonic Force was wearing, a headdress, and I don't think it was to offend or to appropriate, but to bring voice to people who are usually not on stage.
That's not how.
I understand. I'm sorry if I offend.
Was the image taken by a female photographer? Because you framed it in a sense of female empowerment, and I understand that it was in Honey, but you have to understand that as a woman who grew up in that particular time, a lot of the images that were such as you're either in a bikini or you're a mom, right? Mm-hmm. And so to frame an image, I didn't pick up on the indigenous thing. Thank you, Jose, for bringing it up. But I found it to be a little bit odd because you framed it as an image of female empowerment. And to my knowledge, that was not taken by a female photographer. It basically spoke to a lot of the tropes that TLC was actually facing at that time, where they had to be sexy, where they could, it wasn't enough to have her spit. She had to be a sex symbol as well. So I just want us to be clear on that particular thing. It was, but to put them to put up a picture of a woman in a bikini and say, oh, this is about female empowerment, they spoke about that. They spoke about the whole thing about them being sexualized and how it was very, very difficult because they had this image of a female pop group of it being very sexual. So I just want to...
Can I just jump into somebody who, as someone who wrote... As somebody who wrote the cover story on TLC for Vibe magazine and spent a lot of time with that group, what you are saying is absolutely correct.
Exactly.
They were really, really, really dedicated to the idea of having an empowered sexuality that they control. And a lot of where they bumped heads was when people wanted to say to them, I want to dictate what that looks like. But they never shied away from sex. They never shied away from the idea of wanting to be sexy, not just for men, but to have women to have the freedom to be sexy. And I don't know who shot the image for Honey. I think we can probably figure that out. But I also know that it's not as, that's why it was so important to me to have Leone on this panel, because what doesn't come up when you see those images is that it's not the same thing for a male photographer to get the images that Lisa shot as it is for a woman photographer. It's not as easy for us as a woman, somebody that's like an original hip hop journalist, to get those stories and enter into those spaces that are male dominated and still be able to do our jobs. There's a particular kind of fierceness with that. And so I think without actually knowing who shot that images and knowing what Left Eye was thinking in context, everything that we're doing is like subjective. But I do want to like,
Afro-Indigenous too.
Right, but that's also, I didn't hear the beginning of that conversation. I was in the restroom. But I do want to say what you said, because I got it on tape. So
that part,
just, for real.
Take away the mic.
But what
they never talk about that.
No, okay, so hold on. She was talking about the fact that the image itself got a lot of controversy in the moment and that the magazine had to issue an apology.
They issued an apology. Kara May was the editor at the time. We were friends and colleagues, and we recently revisited the conversation because when that came up, it was also sort of around the time when Outkast's performance on the Grammys used the sacred Navajo song and performed in red face, like in Halloween Indian costumes. So there was a lot of offense going around, and this is not, it's such a deep conversation that I don't want to have here, but just for that image, Honey Magazine issued an apology, and I worked with them directly on the next issue to feature stories of actual Indigenous women. And it was a moment of healing, but things keep coming up again, and people don't listen to those.
But she was Afro-Indigenous, a real Afro-Indigenous person.
That has nothing to do with the conversation. Indigenous people.
But she was Indigenous, that's all I'm saying.
Okay, this is exactly why we have talks at the CBVC. But there's a whole staff here that I have got to allow to go home. I wanted to say thank you again to this incredible panel, but also thanks to an incredible audience and this level of engagement.